Okay. All right, we're recording. Okay, guys. Has any questions on things we've covered to date? Has anybody been looking at the study guides I've been posting on Canvas? Graduate students, I saw I didn't post the last one, so I went ahead and added it. So it should be back on there. Okay. There will be a question on your exam that is just like that. I give you a table with weights and prices, and I ask you to calculate value of gain for like 4 different weights. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Any questions? Seeing none. Okay. All right. So today we're going to continue talking about value of gain, cost of gain, and break even, but more so in the context of a feedlot. Okay. So we're going to look at the feedlot budget thing I put together for this class in Excel. We're going to look at some closeouts from cattle. We're going to break down further. We kind of introduced it the last lecture, but we're going to go in more depth on that Kansas State focus on feedlot reports and the information that is given there, what can be done with that information. Um, and I will tell you in exam one, there will be a screen grab of that Kansas State focus on feedlot report, and I'll ask you to make these calculations that we go over today. Okay? Any questions? Oh, all right. So the value of gain in a feedlot's a little more complicated for than it is for like stock or growing cattle. Growing cattle, the price is pretty much just related to the weight of that animal. In a feedlot, most cattle are fed on a formula basis, most on a carcass basis, most are sold on the grid. Who knows what the grid is? Yep, premiums for quality and yield grades and discounts, right? And pretty much a yield grade 3 uh, quality grade choice is your base. So it receives no premium or discount. So every other quality grade by yield grade combination is that based off that base price. Okay, so we'll look at that. All right. So have I said? Okay. So this chart here shows you what percent of cattle were marketed on a live basis, a carcass weight basis, or on the grid, okay, for 1996, 2001, 2006. So whenever I was 3 years old, we were marketing cattle predominantly on a live basis. Something happened early 2000s in 2006 where all of a sudden people are feeding cattle to heavier body weights and they're selling cattle on this grid, this carcass basis. Okay. So today, from January 19th, 2026, 88% of cattle are sold on a dressed basis and 12% are sold on a live basis. So it still happens. Okay. There are some scenarios where it may make sense for a producer to still sell on a live basis. All right. One example of that is if I bought cattle with an appreciable amount of compensatory growth. Okay. Most of that added weight gain from an animal that's experiencing compensatory growth are coming from non-carcass tissues, namely gastrointestinal tract and the liver. Okay. So if they wanted to maximize that animal, the benefit that they're seeing from a compensatory growth animal, okay, maybe they want to sell it on a live basis because most of that added weight is not being. Double A, yes. We back in business? Does that work? Okay. All right. As we were saying, we're selling cattle predominantly on a carcass basis, predominantly on the grid, where people are receiving a premium or a discount based off the yield and quality grade of that animal. You'll also receive discounts, and we'll see this in subsequent slides for body weight. Like real light animals will receive a discount, real heavy animals will receive a discount. But what we've talked about in today's climate, do we think that discount for a heavy animal is going to be large or small? It's pretty small. And it's offset by the added percent of animals that are going to grade higher quality, right? Okay. All right. So yield grade. Hopefully this is kind of a more of a review for most people. But what it's supposed to represent is a cutability of a carcass, right? So of a given animal, how much of that carcass is going to contribute to red meat yield? Okay. Um, so cutability is defined as the percentage of closely trimmed, boneless retail cuts from the round, loin, rib, and chuck. So those are the four primary uh, wholesale cuts from a beef animal. All right. Um, so this is the yield grade formula. You guys don't need to know that. I do know that NCBA and some other people are funding some work to update this formula because it's probably a little outdated and not necessarily applying to today's behemoths that we're feeding. Um, 5 yield grades, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Which is worse? 5, which is better? 1. Okay. If this calculation gives you a 3.5, do you think you round down or up? Down, yes. So you round to the better one. So a 3.5 will be a 3 for the grid purposes. Make sense? All right. USDA quality grade. Terms of marbling, so intermuscular fat of the in between the 12th and 13th rib. Is that right, meat people? 12th and 13th? Okay, cool. And also the maturity of that carcass. So you have an older animal, and whenever I say older, I mean physiologically older, not necessarily chronologically older. They could have a really well marbled ribeye, but they won't grade prime if they're B maturity or C maturity. Okay. Okay. 5 classifications of beef carcass maturity: A, B, C, D, and E. Okay. A maturity tends to be with cattle that are 9 to 30 months of age. B is 30 to 42 months of age. C, 42 to 72. D, 72 to 96. E is anything greater than 96. Um, most animals that we feed in the U.S. in feedlots that are getting finished in a feedlot will grade uh, A mature carcasses. Okay. Now, whenever they're making this judgment if the carcass is A, B, C, D, or E, do you think they know the chronological age of that animal? Probably not. Do we think they're looking at their teeth and trying to guess how old that animal is? No. So most of this judgment is based off ossification of cartilage. So ossification is cartilage going to bone. Okay, as animals age, some cartilage gets converted to bone. Okay, so they're making that judgment based off of ossification pattern of the dorsal tip, so the button of the thoracic vertebrae. Okay, so thoracic vertebrae is the section of the backbone that has the ribs attached. Any questions? Pretty straightforward. Any of you meat people disagree with that? Okay. All right, quality grade. Marbling, so it's defined as this white flecks of fat that is contained within muscle. Okay. So why is it good? It's associated with flavor and juiciness of an animal. Higher marbling animals tend to be more tender too. So it's really an estimate of palatability to a consumer. So how much pleasure do we get from eating that steak? Okay. Um, Marbling, evaluated on the ribeye muscle between the 12th and 13th rib. Um, there are 9 degrees of marbling, abundant, which is the most, moderately abundant, slightly abundant, moderate, modest, small, slight, traces, then practically devoid, which would be the least. Okay. So these are images of moderately abundant through slight. As you can see, the amount of that IM fat goes down as the quality grade gets worse. Okay. Any questions? Okay. So what that animal is going to grade is going to be a function of the carcass maturity and the amount of marbling. So I think previously I said a B won't grade prime, so that's incorrect. But typically, for a B mature carcass to grade prime, they have to have more marbling than what A carcass would have to grade prime. Okay, so everybody can look at this and understands this concept. Okay, so you could have a C, D, or an E maturity have abundant marbling, but they won't grade prime. Okay, yes, no, no, but typically heifers will grade better than steers, just because at that same same body weight, they're going to have a higher physiological maturity. So heifers tend to be fatter than steers. So not a dumb question. Any other questions? Okay. Um, okay. So an A mature carcass can have small degrees of marbling and grade choice, but a B mature carcass can have small uh, degrees of marbling and not grade choice. They'll be select or standard. Okay. Also, B mature carcasses can't grade select, which is interesting. Okay. Any questions about this? Main thing I want you to know, quality grade is a function of degrees of marbling and carcass maturity. Okay. All right. This is data I received back from Tyson from an experiment that we conducted at Bushland. Okay. So this is the type of information that they'll send you back for each individual animal, right? And they'll tell you, what they graded, what their carcass weight was. So here's liver score. You can see we had some with some liver abscesses. Does anybody not know what a liver abscess is? Don't be afraid to not know. Okay. All righty. Um, so here's the carcass weights. Here's a marbling number. So 62 is moderate 20, right? So the 6 is in reference to moderate. And that 2 is this 20. So one way that we can do, one thing that people do with that moderate 20 when they're analyzing this data is they'll plug this in as a numerical number as 66, right? And then fit a typical ANOVA to that data. If you guys know what an ANOVA is. Then it's also used in the equation to calculate adjusted final body weight. So where we're calculating based off what that animal was finished at and based off its carcass weight, we can estimate what it weighed at 28% empty body fat, which is important when we're doing retrospective, like what was the energy content of a feed that was fed to that group of animals. So when we're calculating the net energy of gain, net energy of maintenance of those animals, all that's more information than what you need for this class. Okay. These are the quality grade. So we had one grade select, but the rest were high choice, average choice. Doesn't look like we had any prime. So this PYG is a preliminary yield grade. Okay, so that is basically based off of back fat, right? Meat guy, back fat.
Oh, yes.
PYG. Okay, no worries. Fat thickness, so this is in inches, so that's back fat thickness. So it's the subcutaneous fat around that ribeye, right? The thickness of that fat. Ribeye area, so that's in inches squared. So that's the big driver in yield grade. KPH, kidney pelvic heart fat. I think that's all camera graded typically. Meat guy. Is there any other meats people in here that I can pick on? Not here. Okay. And then this is the calculated yield grade. So this is what you get paid on in the grid. Okay. So like here we had a calculated yield grade of 3.17. So in that grid, that would be a yield grade 3. Make sense? Any questions? Okay. Selling on a grid, and this is just some historical graphs that we're going to go through. I think they have data from the USDA AMS reports data through 2021, but just imagine these trends are continuing because they kind of are. Okay. So you can follow that link and look at this, these pictures, and they actually have the Excel sheet that they're generated off of. So you can have access to that by following that link if you want. Okay. So this is, let me move this thing. Okay. Year on the X, percent of carcasses on the Y. And this is cattle that graded prime. Okay. You can see here, kind of beep up and along. All of a sudden, 2011 hits, bam, shoots up. What could have happened in 2011 that made us start feeding cattle to a fatter endpoint?
Had that big drought, lost a bunch of cattle.
Lost a bunch of calves, low feeder supply. So packers were incentivizing people to feed cattle to heavier weights, right? Has anybody seen the U.S. beef production? U.S. beef production has stayed pretty consistent. Hasn't really gone down with what we're seeing with feeder cattle. So for that to make sense, we have to be getting more beef per animal. That's exactly what we're doing. So early 2010s, probably feeding cattle to 1,200 pounds. Now 1,500's not unnormal. Not unnormal. What am I trying to say? Unusual. That's the word. And then up in the Midwest, you'll have people feeding cattle to like 1,800 pounds. Jumbos. Okay. All right. Not as drastic, but a similar story for choice. Beep up and along. All of a sudden, we're seeing an increase in cattle that are grading choice. Okay. Conversely, as you'd expect, we have more cattle grading choice and prime, so we're going to have less cattle grading select. Okay. We're feeding cattle to fatter carcasses. As cattle get fatter, their yield grade decreases. The cutability of those carcasses start to decrease. So we're seeing less yield grade 1s, less yield grade 2s, not much change in yield grade 3s, big increase in yield grade 4s, huge increase in yield grade 5s. This is all pretty consistent. Okay. Any questions? So if I ask you to explain the trend that we're seeing in fed cattle in terms of their carcass traits, what would you say? Feeding cattle to heavier endpoints, therefore they're fatter at harvest. We're increasing percent of cattle that are grading choice and prime, decreasing selects. We're increasing yield or decreasing yield grade 1s and 2s, increasing yield grades 4s and 5s. Okay. Is anybody surprised by that? Have you guys seen this before? Okay. I think now we're somewhere close to like 12% of cattle are grading prime, which is ridiculous. Okay. All right. How feed yards market cattle. Okay. The USDA, if you guys remember, AMS has the mandatory price reporting. Okay. And they group these up into 4 transaction types. Okay. So there are negotiated purchases. That's a spot market sale. Okay. The feeder and packer agree on the price and that is done at the time of sale. Okay. So you'd be selling into the cash market, right? Any questions on negotiated? Okay. So for example, cattle buyer comes out, says, I'll give you 207. You say, no, I want 209. You agree on 208. Okay. Any questions? All right. Negotiated grid. Okay. So this is a negotiated sale with a base price that's agreed upon up front. Okay. The final settlement is, so you don't know your exact price you're going to get paid, but it's going to be based off how they do on the grid. And typically, you may negotiate the premiums or discounts you see, but typically they're going to be based off the USDA 5 area average or something similar. Okay. But you negotiate that base price. Okay. Forward contract. So this is an agreement made between the feeder and the packer, and you agree, and it's made in advance of delivery. Okay. So Tyson comes to me. I have, I don't know, Beck cattle feeding operation. They say, we need 100 head of 80% choice. We'll give you $210 per hundredweight carcass basis. Okay. And they may want me to deliver those cattle in April. So that would be an example of negotiated. Or excuse me, forward contract. Okay. So also called a packer contract. So you commit to selling X number of loads on an agreed upon date. Typically, they'll have some stipulations on percent yield and quality grades. Okay. Then you have a formula. So this is a sale where the price is determined by a formula that is tied to an external reference. So that base price being tied to an external reference could be the USDA 5 area mandatory price reporting, and they're typically based off of negotiated purchases of that from that week. Okay. Which of these do you think most people are doing? Can look in the next slide. Most people are doing formula. Okay. And that has been increasing throughout the years. Okay. Alrighty. So most people are doing the option number 4. Okay. So these are just kind of breaking down some more examples. Negotiated. So think of the cash market. So spot market sale, feeder and packer agree on the price at the time of the deal. Okay. You may have a cattle buyer come out from Tyson. They'll look at your cattle. They'll say, we'll take them, but we need 30 days. Okay. These cattle need 30 more days till they're finished. And then you'll schedule delivery for that date. Okay. But you agreed upon it on the price at that time. Does that make sense? Okay. So delivery is near term. Okay, so it's close to when that deal was made. The key point, no carcass quality grid premiums or discounts are applied. Okay. All right, negotiated grid. So it's a negotiated sale with a base price agreed upfront, but the final settlement is adjusted after slaughter using a grid. Okay. Base price plus a schedule of premiums and discounts for carcass attributes. So quality grade, yield grade. They'll have discounts applied to weight and then dark cutters, etc. So we know the base price at the time of the deal. However, the final price that you receive is not known until those carcasses are graded. Okay. All right. Again, still a near-term delivery. So this incentivizes quality grade, okay? Because the yield grade discounts are very small, and we'll look at some of these. And it puts more burden, risk maybe on the feeder. If they don't feed them to a high quality endpoint, they will receive lower price. Does that make sense? Forward contract, okay? It's an agreement made well in advance for delivery at a future date with price terms set ahead of time. Okay. This could either be a fixed price or a basis, and that basis could be in reference to like the CME, so the futures market. And you could use futures price that are uh, uh, around the time of your agreed upon delivery. Okay. Um, So this may also include a grid, but you would have ahead of time agreed upon what that grid would be, what your premiums and discounts would be based off quality and yield grade. Um, okay. Delivery. So it's an outfront delivery. It's at a specified future date, could be 30 to 90 days. I know some people will have them forward contracted at the time they arrive in the feedlot. So what's a benefit of a packer doing a forward contract?
It's the backer.
Yeah, if the price were to go up, it would benefit the packer. If it goes down, benefits the feeder. So it's kind of a way of locking in a profit. So it's kind of a way of market risk protection. Okay.
Right. Oh, less than what it sells for, even if it goes up, you still make money, it's not as much.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, very true. Okay. Another benefit for the packer helps with their scheduling, getting cattle into the plant. They know well in advance they're going to have this group of cattle come in. They can set the time, A shift or B shift, time of the day that they come in. Okay. All right, formula. So uh, the price is determined by a formula tied to an external reference, often combined with a grid. So this external reference could be a futures, like the near futures contract. Could also be the 5-area weighted average cash price. So base price is calculated using a published benchmark. So USDA 5-area weighted average cash price could be based off of a plant average, could be based and adjusted off of a boxed beef cutout, could be based off of the near term futures based index. Then based off the location of the plant, they'll apply some amount of basis to those numbers and they'll adjust that base price based on that. Then they'll apply grid premiums and discounts after that animal is harvested. Okay. So this formula contract can be scheduled ahead. So it's commonly used by packers to set their schedules. They may come out 30 days, may come out and look at it and be like, we have an opening for our B shift for 200 head 30 days from now. Okay. Um, Key point, it reduces negotiation frequency and it links cattle prices to the wider market. Okay. Now, some feeders will complain, some finisher, some feedlot operators may complain that packers are using their negotiated cash sales to drive down the price that they're getting on for this formula. Okay. So if they're setting their base price based off of what that negotiated cash is over that week, right? Maybe they are paying less to set their base price for these formula cattle. Does that make sense? I don't know how widespread that is, especially if you're using the five state area from the USDA. Okay, so here's an example of a formula. Okay, so we're setting our base price based off of the USDA 5 area cash dressed market. So the reference price is the prior week's USDA 5 area weighted average dress price of $280 per hundredweight. Okay. We have a contract adjustment, so plant location differential, take off $1.25 per hundredweight. Freight credit, we're going to add 75 cents per hundredweight. We're paying for the freight. The packer is going to reimburse us or some of that. Okay. Timely delivery premium. So if they show up on time, they'll give us 50 cents a hundredweight. Volume commitment premium. So based off the number of cattle we're sending them at this time, they may give us a premium, 25 cents a hundredweight in this example. So our base dress price, 280 minus $1.25 plus 75 cents plus 50 plus 25 is $280.25 per hundredweight. Okay. All right. So if the settlement is based on a live basis, we can convert that carcass-based price to a live-based price based off of usually an agreed upon dressing percent. So in this example, we use 62%. So $280.25 per hundredweight times 0.62 is $173.75 per hundredweight on a live basis. Make sense? Okay. So this would be our base price. We could adjust based off of grid premiums and discounts. Any questions so far?
But like our packers not, are they their set grade or kind of that?
Yeah, so that's going to be something that is probably agreed upon at time that you're setting your contract for delivery of the cattle. Probably a lot of people use these USDA mandatory price reporting numbers. I think would probably be the average. And we'll look at where you can find that. Other questions? Okay. So here's an example B. Here we're going to tie that live basis to the CME live cattle futures. All right, so nearby, and who knows what I'm talking about with nearby. So we're in January, nearby futures market may be February, right? So nearby CME live cattle futures settlement for delivery week. Okay, so it's at 175.20 cents per hundredweight. Okay, here we just have a contract adjustment for plant basis relative to the futures market. So negative $1. So what do I mean by basis? Okay, so the futures market's kind of a US average, but price is going to vary region to region, location to location. Okay, so your basis is calculated based on the near futures contracts, okay, and the cash market. Does that make sense? So you can calculate the difference between those two, and that is your basis, and they do this for every commodity. last year we had a lot of people that took Roger Hannegriff's futures and options classes, and they knew probably more than I did about all this stuff. So don't expect you guys to know all that in depth. We're gonna have a guest lecture come and talk about market risk protection near the end of the semester. That'll be after exam 3. Any questions on this? Does this make kind of sense? Okay. All right. Okay, and then they give us they're knocking us 40 cents per hundredweight for freight or / yardage. So yardage is if they spend an excessive amount of time at the holding pens or something at the plant. Okay, so $1.7520 minus $1 minus 40 cents. So our basis price is $173.80 per hundredweight. Okay, so if this is on a live basis, we can use that 62% dressing percentage again to calculate this dollars per hundredweight on a carcass basis. So live basis divided by carcass dressing percent gives us carcass basis. Okay. There will be a question where you'll have to use this. Okay. I may give you the price in a carcass basis, but I make you calculate value of gain, and that needs to be done on a live basis. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So this dress basis, carcass basis is $280.32 per hundredweight. So again, this is just our base price. There'll be premiums and discounts associated with that based on how they do it on the rail. Okay. Questions? Okay. All right. So this is from the USDA livestock mandatory reporting, price reporting. They have a live cattle dashboard. And this just shows you the distribution of cattle. So the count. This tells you their prices. Okay. These are 3 different contract types. So we have forward or formula, forward contract, negotiated grid. This is from last week, I believe. What does that date say? 119. So this is from 3 days ago. Is that right? 2 days ago? No, 4 days ago. It doesn't matter. Okay. What do you notice here on this head count? This distribution's over 1 million head, which is 1,000, right? This is like 60,000 head. This is around 200,000 head. Okay. Most people are selling cattle, marketing cattle on a formula basis. Most cattle are marketed that way. Okay. All right. This tells you the average, the weighted average price, dress basis, live basis. Okay. So if I want to know the dressing percent or get a good estimate of dressing percent of these cattle, I could take this live price divided by this dress price, multiply by 100. That'll give me an estimate of dressing percent. Okay. Looks like this forward contract, they actually sold their cattle for a little bit less than what they did for the formula contracted cattle. Okay. This negotiated grid is just a little bit more than this formula based cattle. Okay. All right. This tells you the percent of cattle that are marketed in the US over time. I think it only goes to 2020 though. And breaks it out by contract type. So negotiated, negotiated grid, formula, forward contract. So most people are selling cattle on a formula basis. Most people are not forward contracting, so they're not having a established contract with a packer. Okay. Most people are not doing cash market sales. Most people are selling on a formula where you will have an agreed upon base price that's based off CME, USDA 5 area average. Some of them will base it off of previous negotiated cash sales for that week. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So this is cattle contracts library, just a little summary report. Can't tell if that worked. Okay. So contract specs, premium discounts. Okay. The ones in the slides are from last year, but this is the 16th. Okay. So there at the top, you see yield grade. It says 1, 2, 4, and 5. Why isn't 3 on there? It's the base. So yield grade 1 are receiving a $4.76 per hundredweight premium over a yield grade 3. Okay. Yield grade 2s are receiving a $2.55 per hundredweight premium over yield grade 3. Yield grade 4s are receiving an $8.92 discount relative to yield grade 3. Yield grade 5 is a $15.40 per hundredweight discount. Okay. So as you go further away from that base in terms of yield grade 3, yield grade 1 is going to have a higher premium than yield grade 2. Yield grade 4 is going to have a less of a discount than yield grade 5. Does that make sense? Okay. So here's the premiums and discounts for quality. Okay. Prime is receiving, oh, this is choice. Okay. They're receiving an $18 per hundredweight premium over average choice. Okay. This choice over choice spec, that is upper 2/3 choice or high choice relative to an average choice quality grade. Okay. It's receiving a $3.35 premium. Okay. Select, getting docked $6 a hundredweight. This is relative to, that would be relative to average choice. And then the one above that would be upper 2/3 choice. Okay. So here, weight, and I have this in the slides, but this is lightweight 1. So off the top of my head, it's in the slides, so we'll look at it, know for sure. But that's usually somewhere, carcass weight, somewhere 500 to 600 pounds. Lightweight, and they're receiving a $25 discount, okay, per hundredweight. Lightweight 2, I may have these backwards, but it's in the slides. They're receiving a $25 discount. Heavyweight is receiving a $13. So they're receiving a $12 per hundredweight less of a discount than lightweight cattle. Is that surprising? No. This is how packers incentivize producers to harvest heavier cattle. They play with these premiums and discounts. The other thing I want you to note, look at the premiums for yield grade 1s and 2s and compare those to the premiums for primes and upper 2/3 choice. They are much more incentivizing quality over yield. Okay. That's another way that they incentivize producers to feed cattle to heavier endpoints. Does this all make sense? Any questions on this? This one was new to me. Beef dairy cross, they're actually discounting these animals. Not by a whole lot, but compared to a native beef animal, they're receiving a $6.75 per hundredweight discount. I would say a lot of the times, though, has anybody seen beef on dairy? A lot of the times, can you tell them apart from an Angus animal? We fed a lot. My dad bought a lot of dairy beefs and then carried them through finish, did a study on them, and I would tell you, you could when they first arrived at the feedlot, but that by the time they were leaving the feedlot, you could not distinguish them. They were identical. In fact, most of them were sold as CAB. Who knows what CAB is? Certified Angus beef. So most of those dairy beefs that my dad was feeding went to Creekstone in southern Kansas and were marketed as CAB. Okay. So CAB is receiving a $5.76 per hundredweight bonus relative to other beef breeds. Who knows how they determine if an animal is certified Angus? And then something around the ear. They don't want them to have real long ears. Okay. Um, so I've seen Holstein, full bred Holstein animals be certified Angus beef. It's only 50% of their hide has to be over black or black hided. So that's kind of a ridiculous marketing thing, if you ask me. But um, so based off this CAB, okay, do we think most dairy breeds are going to be bred to a Charolais? No. Okay. Would it be being you have this animal that just naturally produces a lot of marbling? Would it make sense for us to breed them to a Charolais, which is heavier muscled? Maybe. Most of them are being bred to Angus semen. Most of these dairy cows are being bred to Angus semen to produce these beef on dairies. Anybody have any questions about that? Okay. Does anybody know why we're feeding why dairy beefs are so hot right now? What's that? What about sex semen? Yeah. So for those of you guys that don't know, the dairy industry is now using sect semen, which has become cheaper to use, right? They're breeding their top performing dairy cows to Holstein sect semen so that they know they're going to produce females. And the top producing dairy cows are the ones they're retaining heifers from. The rest of their lower producing dairy cows are breeding to beef semen. Okay. And those dairy beef crosses are entering the beef supply chain. That makes sense? Okay. Uh, beef dairy cross, dairy type. So a full-blown dairy animal is receiving one hellacious discount at $34 a hundredweight. So you meet people probably know all about the angularity of the carcass. The ribeye looks more oval shaped, has less customer appeal. They're real long, so you can have problems with them dragging in the packing plant. So they get discounted really heavy. Any other thing, meat guy? Okay. Yeah, a big thing with the dairies was around the angularity and odd shaped ribeye. What I've heard people talk about, like Blake Foraker out at Texas Tech now was at Washington, did a lot of that work. Um, yeah, so a bullock would be like real late castrated. So they like show a lot of male, huh? Does anybody have a different definition for bullock? That's my understanding of what a bullock is. They were castrated real late, so they're showing a lot of bull traits. Okay. Any other thoughts? Okay. Let's get out of that. We got 20 or 17 minutes. I think we're doing all right. Okay, so this is the old one. What does that say? January 17th, 2025. So this is from last year. Um, okay. I think that primed a little lower or the same. Hmm, interesting. I don't see much difference in yield grade, still really low. Uh, I guess they were only discounting a dairy cross by $2.68 last year. I don't remember noticing that. Okay, so this is the premium of a high choice or upper two-thirds choice compared to like an average choice, which is the base. Okay, lightweight one, they have carcasses 500 to 600 pounds. Lightweight two, they have carcasses 600 to 700 pounds. Heavyweight one, 900 to 999 pounds. And then heavyweight two is over 1,000 pounds. So you could have an animal with a carcass that's over 1,000 pounds, and they're only being discounted by $14 per hundredweight. That's crazy. What's 1,000 divided by 0.62? 0.64. That's a 1,600-pound live weight animal ish. It's nuts. Okay. Okay. So that information that was in the slides, took it out here. So this is the premium for yield grade 1. This is a premium for yield grade 2. That up there is the premium for a prime, premium for choice or a upper two-thirds choice, base price, discount for select, discount for standard, discount for yield grade 4, discount for yield grade 5. So how would we complete this grid? If I had a yield grade 1 prime, what would the discount be or the premium be? About $32, $33. Okay. What about a yield grade 5 standard? Don't see many of those. But you'd be docked about $55, $56 per hundredweight. You guys see how that's done? Okay. So that's it completed. Okay. There in reds, I showed discounts. There in black, showed premiums. So you have an upper two-thirds choice animal that is yield grade 5. They'll only be docked 68 cents a hundredweight. They are very much incentivizing quality grades over cutability, yield grades. Okay. Any questions? If I give you a blank grid on a test, you'd be able to do that simple math? Do you guys need practice? Want to look at it? Okay, I'll try to put that up on Canvas. Okay, any questions? Okay. All right, for this class, know what gives premiums and discounts for fed finished cattle. Okay. I will always provide you the sell price for the cattle. I may provide them on a live or a carcass basis, and you may have to convert a live basis to a carcass basis to a live basis. Okay. If I give it to you on a carcass basis and you need to make the calculation on a live basis, I'll give you dressing percent. Okay. But you need to remember, do I divide here or do I multiply here? Does that make sense? Any questions? Okay. So dressing percent, 100 times the hot carcass weight divided by the final body weight. Okay. So maybe I don't give you dressing percent, but I give you carcass weight and final body weight, and you have to calculate that yourself. Is that unfair? I'm just kidding. All right, live sell price is equal to carcass price times carcass price dollar per hundredweight divided by dressing percent divided by 100. Okay. One way you can build mental checks, should a dollar or a dollar per hundredweight on a carcass basis be larger or a smaller number than on a live basis? Larger, right? Because if we have the same amount of money being spent on that animal and there's less weight, that price dollar per hundredweight needs to be larger. Does that make sense? Okay. Don't be afraid to set up your Common Core train tracks. I think that's what you guys call it now. We called it dimensional analysis or unit conversion, but train tracks, I guess, is a little more cutesy. Okay. All right, here's an example. All right. We have a 902-pound heifer that we bought at $250 per hundredweight. Okay. We sell them at $1,465 per pounds. They were on feed for 142 days. and we sold them for $194.77 per hundredweight. Okay. What's the value of gain for that animal? Just like you did last, right? We have our sell weight, and so that's 14.65 because that's 14.65 hundredweights times dollars per hundredweight minus our purchase weight, 9.02, because that's 9.02 hundredweights times our purchase price, dollars per hundredweight, divided by total weight gain, so 14.65 minus 9.02. Does anyone want to try that real quick? What does that math equal come out to? $106. Okay. I guess I didn't provide the answer. I'm going to assume that's correct. Moving on. All right. Cost of gain in a feed yard. I think we've already said this. Most of the cost of gain is driven by corn price. Why would that be? Yeah, we're feeding 50 to 70% of the diet is going to be corn. Okay. So here we have projected cost of gain. Here we have corn price in dollars per bushel. And that R squared, 0.9362. Does anyone, graduate students mostly, what does R squared tell us? Well, it's correlation squared, isn't it? So it's literally R Pearson's correlation times Pearson's correlation. Okay, but what does that indicate? How close fitting it is. Literally, R squared is percent of the variation that's explained by your predictor. So 94% of the variation in cost of gain is explained just by corn price. Okay. So the other 6% could be death loss, could be medication costs, labor, yardage, whatever. Okay. Okay. All right. So this is for steers. This is for heifers. Again, 94% of that variation is explained. Okay. Why might steers and heifers have different cost of gains, with heifers having higher cost of gains than steers? This is corn bushel price, dollars per bushel. Okay, from $3.50 per bushel to $8.50 per bushel. For both of them, as corn price increases, cost of gain increases, but heifers are always higher than steers. Why is that? Yeah, they take more feed per unit of gain. They're less efficient. And it's literally because at the same body weight, they're at a higher stage of physiological maturity. Okay. And so they are putting more fat in their gain than a steer. I've said it again before, I'll say it again. Rule of thumb, it takes 5 times the amount of metabolizable energy to put down 1 pound of lean of fat as it does 1 pound of lean tissue. Okay. So I don't know what corn price is, but it's somewhere around $4.50, $5 a bushel, I think. Feed yards are probably somewhere around this cost of gain. Early 2010s, we were probably somewhere around here, and we had a lot of feed yards going out of business because their feed costs were so high. So luckily, corn prices have not increased excessively. Otherwise, you pair that with low feeder supply, and you'd have a bunch of people in a bunch of trouble. Okay. All right. All right. So feed yards assign cost to everything. They're in the business of making money. Okay. So they account for things like the cost to mix and deliver feed. Okay. This is a report from 2016 by Karshij and Howlett. I think it's out of Ohio State. They looked at, gosh, I don't even know how many different feed yards, but they assigned a price per ton of feed to labor, fuel, utilities, repair, equipment depreciation, interest, insurance. The total ownership expense is the sum of this. Total operating expense is the sum of that. So on average, it costs them $5.20 per ton to mix and deliver feed. That does not include feed cost. Okay, so that's just equipment, labor, time. Okay, questions? How do we think feed yards are billing this out? Do you think there's a one size fit all? They may do it a couple of different ways. They may have it built into their feed markup. They may have it built into their yardage. Those are probably the two main ways. Okay. Okay. Talk to my buddy, consulting nutritionist. So for a small yard, they call it $6 per ton. For a large yard, they call it $12 per ton. Think I spoiled it by including on this slide. Why would a smaller yard have a lower delivery, mix and delivery cost compared to a large yard? Less labor, smaller equipment costs less. They have less depreciation costs, require less maintenance, less fuel because they have closer pens to their commodity barns. So there's less deadheading to a pen, right? Any questions? Okay. I don't know. Okay. All right. Break even sell price, just like we had last Tuesday. Okay. Break even sell price, purchase cost plus operating cost divided by sell weight. How much money do I need to sell these animals for to break even, to not make or lose any money? Okay. Break even purchase price. Okay. Sell weight times sell price minus your operating costs. Okay. Divided by purchase weight. So what do I need to purchase these animals for? What would I have needed to purchase these animals for to break even? So if you're a feed yard and you have a pretty good idea of what your cost of gain is, you have a good idea of what you're going to finish your cattle to, and you have a good idea of what you could lock your price in, whether it's futures market or whatever, and you're going to an auction market to make a decision you want to buy a lot of cattle or not, you can use this to determine how much can I spend on them. Does that make sense? Any questions on that? Okay. All righty. So I've got 3 minutes. So I won't do what I intended to do. But this is a literal closeout from a feed yard in Nebraska. Okay. Here I have some assumptions, right, on things that aren't reported in this closeout. But there you can see the yardage rate's 40 cents per head per day. Gender, these were mixed steers and heifers. Bottom, February 16th, 2024. We sold 61 head. We bought 63, somewhere it says that. So we had a 3.17% death loss. This is total in weight. This is total sell weight. This is the price that feeder animal cost in dollars per hundredweight. So we bought them for 397 pounds for $318.17 per hundredweight. We sold them at 1,354 pounds. Okay, you guys are following along? Okay. This is the total amount of dry matter feed that were fed to that group of animals. 450,000 pounds of feed were fed to those cattle over the 308-day feeding period. Okay. Total gain, they gained 60,298 pounds. Okay. Took a lot more feed than it did. Took a lot more feed than it does the amount of gain you get out. Okay. So dry matter feed to gain, 7.47. Okay. There in kind of the Midwesty area, you're probably in the 7.5s in feed to gain. High Plains, you're probably somewhere in the low 6s, high 5s. Okay. Another reason that these guys probably had a higher feed to gain is the growing part of the time that they were on feed when they were fed a growing diet, because remember they were bought at 398 pounds, okay, is also included in this. Average feed cost per ton, $110 per ton to feed these animals. That's really low. We're in the 200s per ton in the High Plains. So these guys are probably a farmer feeder. Here's some vet med costs, some processing costs, other things that are important. These animals gained 3.16 pounds per day. They consumed 23.62 pounds per day. So this feed to gains in an as-fed basis. Or excuse me, this is the average dry matter cost per ton, 182. So this is an average feed cost per ton on an as-fed basis. With those numbers, we can calculate dry matter percent of the diet. Okay, so this is it completed. This lot of cattle made $27 per hundredweight, $370 per head. So this is head sold. For the whole group, made $23,359 for 60 head of cattle that were there for 300 days. That's not bad. Okay. Any questions? I think I'm a little over. Okay. I may go over this next Tuesday. I'll finish this up. Yeah, if it's snowing, I guess we won't have class. Darn it. Yeah. Yeah. Hey. Yep.
I wasn't here on Tuesday. My car's been in the shop for like 2 months.
Okay.
And it was available on Tuesday and I was like, give me my fucking car back.
Okay.
So I wasn't here for that. So I'm
me-
assuming that you wanted the draw one.
Um,
I'm ready to go.
I could. 1 second.